Well, it was in the Grand Hotel, Bournemouth, my first formal session with the Beatles. And I needed a space because George Martin had just rung up Brian Epstein saying, we need a cover for the next album urgently. Brian said, can you do it? Is there something you could do for us? So I said, well, let me think about it. The next day I said, I think I've got the idea. But the only place I could shoot it was in the dining room of the hotel, where we could draw the dark curtains round in the background and use the light of the windows to do the shot, which was the cover of With the Beatles Meet the Beatles. The backdrop wasn't as dark as I wanted, but I managed to print it so it went darker. And that was 2 days after meeting them. Well, from the point of my meeting the Beatles in Bournemouth, I then went with them to Southampton Television to watch them do their first television show. At that stage, I had to go back to London because I had other work. The Beatles was not my permanent work. It was a hobby. And then I went to Abbey Road Studios, where they were doing mixing and some re-recording for the With the Beatles album. After the recording session, sometimes they wanted to go out to a club for a drink, to relax, and we used to go to clubs like the Ad Lib. And then we went on from clubs to informal meetings in John's house, because John had to move down to live in London. Brian wanted that, and there was an apartment free above mine. So John said, well, look, check if we can move in there, which he did with Cynthia and Julian. So John was living upstairs. So I had Lennon upstairs, but he put Hadley on the bell downstairs so that people didn't recognize the Lennon presence. So I used to hear Elvis upstairs, and he used to hear Charlie Parker downstairs. And there was contact with John, more personal contact with John. And then, of course, I went to Sweden with them, I went to France with them, I went to New York with them on their promotional journeys, and all that was before Hard Day's Night. I can't remember exactly what the conditions were about the beginning of the idea of the film. I know that there was talk between them and Brian about who was going to write it, and then there were meetings with the producer. But of course I wasn't present at all this, so I can't say what the continuity was. All I can say is that now and again I heard that there was a film going to be made, that they had to make a selection of a writer who could make it humorous, who could reflect their activity of their real lives, that it was going to be in black and white. And so really I just got vague waves preceding the whole thing. First of all, I knew where Marylebone Station was, and I heard that they were filming there. So it was a Sunday, I had time off, so I thought I'd just go along and see what was happening. And I went along and said hello to Dick and Walter, who I probably knew by that time anyway. And I said to Dick, look, would you mind if I took up a few positions beside the camera, because that way I can reflect exactly what you're doing. One of the sequences was of fans chasing the four Beatles into the station from outside, so that they converged, and then the Beatles had at a certain point to start running into the door. Now I shot that as a sequence from the camera angle. Then later inside the station they did sequences with Paul with his moustache on. But then I got on the dolly on the travelling, which went down the platform alongside the train, when the three other Beatles being chased by the fans closely. And that's a beautiful action shot from the actual camera angle of where Dick set up the camera. Shooting their first movie, they had to get up early in the morning. That was something they were not too keen about. So maybe this was the first time when they actually had to do professional work under disciplined conditions. And somehow they did it well. Maybe that was due to the management of Dennis O'Dell and his assistants. Bob Howard was one of them. So I give credit to the production for organising the Beatles in a friendly way, so that when Paul was asked what was his experience of filming, he says, well, it's a good way to pass the afternoon.
Do I snore, Paul? With a trombone hooter like yours, it'd be unnatural if you didn't.
In Twickenham, I was more interested because it was in sets. I didn't see any outside locations near Twickenham. I watched Gil Taylor's lighting. I saw the kind of set decoration they did to recreate Beatle life. I watched Dick directing under very tight conditions. In fact, at one point, he said, look, no cameras, nothing, because he wanted peace to be able to complete the shooting under schedule. And obviously Walter, being the producer, was looking at his watch now and again. So the Beatles had to work under tight, disciplined conditions. So what I did was I went up into the gantry where the lights were, so that I didn't interfere with anybody, and I did some high angle shots down into the sets quietly. I accepted the fact that it was in black and white as a natural thing. The lighting, fine. Their capacity to improvise and be entertaining, again, was good, I thought, accepting the fact they had no dramatic training. So I think they just used their own naturalness, their own inner talent, under disciplined conditions to create something that was entertaining. And again, this would reflect Dick's flexible attitude to directing them. When I was asked to do the poster for the film, Walter said, well, look, can you come up with anything? So I said, well, let me think about it. And very soon I suggested to him that the one image couldn't reflect the range of animation that the Beatles created in the film. I said, what about doing a sequence of photographs of each individual in long poster format, so that there's a feeling of animation from each individual Beatle? And this came out of polyphotos, which was a system in the 40s where a photographer would shoot a sequence of frames of a portrait of you, and you would give different expressions, smiling, serious, stupid, whatever. That was called polyphoto. And then they gave you all these prints. They liked the idea. They said, go ahead, set up the portrait shoots, which I did. Well, when I looked at the result of all the Beatles, I thought, well, maybe there could be some element in it that could be a surprise element, something a bit odd. So I thought, well, since Wilfrid Bramble was one of the key characters, let's do a shot of Wilfrid, like a Beatle, and just pop him in once. And then I put Paul to the right, Paul to the left, looking at both ways at Wilfrid in the centre, and I think that gave a touch, a richness to the poster. Walter was the one who commissioned it and followed the whole thing through, and it was thanks to Walter that that idea, and later the title credits of the film got done by some humble person like myself. And I was very happy with the result, both of the poster and of the end credits, which was low budget, using simple images, and like with Paul, closing and opening the eyes from two images, dissolving. So we used very simple techniques to get something that I think was graphically effective. I felt the general atmosphere was that the film was creating a buzz, and so I was happy for Walter, happy for the Beatles, happy for Dick. I never sensed anything in any historical perspective. I mean, if something is good, you just feel it's good at the time, and you think it will last. That's all I thought. The media tried to make play of, well, they're just a passing phase, or in 10 years' time, nobody will know. But if something is of quality, you feel that if something is good, it's going to last. And it has. And I'm glad that it has, because what they communicated was a sense of freshness, of being in love, being good, and happiness.